Lauren Jones, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming and enjoying and agreeing to do this. I had a word freeze. Um, Lauren, I know your background, but I'd love to share your background with the listeners. So, would you mind giving me a sort of a 60-second potted history of where you've been before, your experience, and what your specialism is?
Yeah. My specialism is sort of a brand strategist and accounts manager. Developing accounts departments really is kind of the thing I've been now specializing in. My expertise is really in the social impact space, the nonprofit space. I've spent my whole career working in nonprofits, in cultural institutions, doing a variety of different things. Worked in a lot of different spaces, doing everything from fundraising to ticket sales to at cultural institutions. Like I've done everything across the map. And for the past about 10 years ago, I kind of switched to the consulting side for the nonprofit space, working primarily in the branding space and branding for nonprofits and the social impact kind of world. And doing that, it's been really incredible because I've got to work with so many different nonprofits, foundations, and kind of mission-driven organizations to clarify their voice, expand their reach, and really hone in on their brand and how they kind of talk about their mission and their impact in the world. And now, most recently, I've been helping other social impact agencies build out their accounts departments. And now I'm at Wide Eye, which is a creative agency that works in the space as their first ever senior director of client services, doing exactly that, building out an accounts department so that they can really define how they interact with their clients and how they deliver their work and what those longstanding partnerships look like. But they are also a creative branding and web agency, specifically with nonprofit clients.
Okay, this is so great because I think the people listening to this are going to get a lot out of it. It's the first time that I've had a podcast talking about social impact and this industry sector. So for those listening, I think either if you're working in an agency that's dedicated to social impact type clients, or you maybe have in your portfolio a couple of clients that maybe are charities, I think this is going to be useful. And also, thirdly, it's interesting for those agencies that don't currently have any kind of account management function dedicated, that they might get some tips. So for lots of reasons, I think this is going to be a good episode. So can you just start by sharing how the sector is different from maybe a more, for-profit type agency business?
Yeah. First, can I define the sector? Because I think the nonprofit industry is so widespread. It covers a lot of ground. And you'll hear me say social impact field or social impact world. That does include nonprofits, but it also includes philanthropy, cultural institutions, universities, governments, political campaigns, charities, CSR groups. It can also include social impact investing, labor unions. Like it's just such a wide umbrella. So there are a lot of, I think, intricacies within there that are major differentiators. But funny enough, I think there's actually more similarities than not. Like in any sector, I think, you got to maximize funding, you got to engage your stakeholders and your audiences, and you've got to have a competitive advantage. And that's I think that's true here as well in all this social impact fields. I think the main difference is kind of how those are prioritized. I think the biggest KPI in the social impact space is impact and what impact organizations make on the world, right? That could be dollars raised, that could be revenue like it is in the for-profit space, but it could also be people served, policy changes at a government level or in an institution. It could be memberships or volunteers increasing, or could be influence, it could be power building, it could be solidarity building, could be changing public opinion. There's a lot of different ways that impact can show up. It could be winning a campaign. There's a lot of ways that one can quantify impact, but it is kind of the biggest KPI. And I think the most important thing, one of the biggest challenges that individuals in the nonprofit space is not just getting that impact, hitting those KPIs, but also demonstrating that impact and how you actually show that impact to the world. How do you show how many people you've served without just a number? You know, there's like a lot of other ways to show that impact, but demonstrating that is a big, I think maybe one other big difference that I've seen and I think is important is that the sort of collective, that's maybe different from the for-profit space, the sort of collective contributions of all of these organizations and institutions really kind of ladder up to like a system of change. And that's like, there's a lot of historical context about social movements and a lot of understanding of how change happens on a human level and also a systemic level that's all kind of, this all kind of ladders up to. And I think that is an important, it's an important piece to understand in order to be a successful account manager in this world. I think being able to understand the larger context is really a key, and how an organization's theory of change fits into that. And we can go into that in depth, but I do think that's a big differentiator that is especially important in this space. And of course, there's other differences that are like, you know, audiences are more like donors and members in the public versus demographics, and there's different funding models, and there's a couple other differences, but I think those are kind of the two key ones that stand out to me as being important, especially as an account person.
Okay, this is fantastic, and I personally didn't realize there was quite so many strands. So thank you for first kind of painting a broader picture. Just let's go a little bit deeper on this change. Did you describe it as a pyramid, or is there a visual that you've got in mind when you're explaining the impact of the larger, this change model?
Yeah, I think in my head it's a circle.
Okay.
And the circle has a lot of concentric arms. And so it's sort of like all these different, you know, this is a little bit maybe more of my personal theory of how change works. But I think in order for change to happen on a human scale, there's a multitude of ways in which change happens, and we have to come at change from every angle. There has to be, every piece of the puzzle has to be moving, you know? And so you need your community organizers on the ground, getting people, you know, out in the streets, and you also need your giant family foundations that are moving money through the space. And we need everybody to be doing it, you know? And I think understanding how all those things play into each other and become a bigger, I think understanding that systems change is helpful when you're working with a lot of different clients and different parts of the mosaic of change, you know?
Well, if a model doesn't exist, I think you need to draw one. Because honestly,
I'm sure there's theories out there that encapsulate this, but yeah.
But you've described it so well, and obviously we've always got the account manager in mind when we're having these conversations. And I think, let's suppose you're an account manager joining a not-for-profit agency. This kind of model will help you recognize all the key stakeholders in the mix and what their different roles are, just as a kind of first impression. Can you give us a couple of examples just to bring this to life?
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned that you're brand strategist, and I think your background was in design, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was originally. Yeah, I didn't mention that, but it is.
So yeah, I'm keen to understand, like, to bring it to life for the listeners. Can you give me an example, maybe one or two clients of a typical brief that would come into your agency, and how much of a remit you have to sort of position the foundation or the not-for-profit? Just give us an example so we can visualize a day in the life.
Yeah. I think there's three in my work in the branding space. I think there's three primary asks that are sort of like the bare bones deliverables that happen in this space. The first one is visual identity. So the visual representation of the brand guidelines. That's pretty straightforward. Logos, colors, you know. Verbal identity, and that's the verbal brand of an organization. So its mission statement, its vision statement, its values, its brand story, how it describes what it does and why to the world, why it's important. That's where those differentiators come in and are important. And then, you know, third is going to be, and I'll say also about the mission, vision, values. It's very much, you know, it's got to be tailored to the audience, whoever their audience may be. That could be the donors or grantees, the public, whatever. And then the third piece, I think, is how that brand is represented in the world and their web presence, how an organization is using the internet and technology to show that impact that we talked about. They may be doing that through data. They may be doing that through personal stories of grantees or members. And also oftentimes resources and other services they provide to the public, access to those things. But I think the key thing that's specific to this world is the sort of desired outcomes they're looking for, and those are the things I mentioned before: impact, right? Converted donors, inspiring action of some kind of call to action to participate in something, building trust. That's a huge challenge, I think, in this, especially right now. I think organizations are dealing with a little bit of an erosion of trust, I think, at large. And then also, kind of being able to articulate their impact and show their impact to the world. Those are the main kind of deliverables that come out of my work and the kind of things that organizations are coming to us looking for. There are also, I think, some hidden needs in there that they're maybe not outright asking for. I think one of those is about education and educating. For me, branding it's so critical to an organization's mission. I think branding needs to be as important as it is in the for-profit space. It needs to be a key pillar of your business. It needs to be how you move through the world always, and it should be part of every part of planning you do. But I think right now that's less commonly the way that brand is approached in the kind of social impact space. I think it often is maybe an afterthought, or it's sort of a sub part of your strategic plan. It may be just the communications team's problem. It's not really elevated to the level of that strategic planning process and that thinking of how that really is critical to executing on the mission. And I think the second hidden need is what we just talked about, that contextual understanding, right? Where an organization's mission fits into that larger system, the historical context, the pressures, the tensions that come with that. Every kind of, I listed a bunch of different kinds of nonprofit organizations. Each one of those has its own stakeholder dynamics. It has its own funding dynamics. It has its own, political, challenges. So being really aware of that circle or whatever diagram that I will now go and create, being really aware of that and really understanding both the historical and current context of what's happening in this world, it just creates so much less friction when executing on the work. And I feel like nonprofits and organizations, when they're looking for a creative agency to work with, that's a huge thing that they're looking for. They want to know that you get them, and they're not going to have to explain all the intricacies of their boards, whatever. They want to know that you're gonna just hit the ground running and not have and have all that contextual understanding. And I think, I don't know if that answered your question, but hopefully those are sort of the what they come to us for, and also what they need that maybe aren't always saying.
This is excellent, and I think it's a really comprehensive answer. I'm thinking, these types of organizations, how often do they have to revisit their core brand and their core mission? Is this something that you only get involved at the beginning of setting up a foundation or something, or is this something, how often do you think they need to revisit it?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends, again, on which thing we're talking about. Obviously political campaigns, sometimes there's 2 weeks to put it together and you got to hit the ground running, and you have to do that every time. But foundations, larger organizations, institutions, I think there's a cyclical nature to it, right? Obviously, when they're first set up, I think at the max, maybe every 8 to 10 years, they're revisiting their brand. That probably could be a little shorter now than maybe it historically was. In terms of their web presence, their website, if it's built correctly and with a lot of intention, it should last them a good 5 to 8 to 10 years, but with a lot of consistent strategic technology updates that keep it alive and fresh and accessible and all those things. But there is a little bit of a cyclical nature, I think, to folks coming back for more work. Ideally, we're doing our jobs right as account managers. There's more than just those 3 things I listed. there's so much other ways to consult them on how brand shows up in the world, how their website shows up in the world, that allows us to have more than just those every 3 to 5 years touch points, and ideally consistently are engaging with them to keep those things fresh and to make sure that they're, successful in their executing on their mission, really.
You mentioned at the beginning that it's difficult to measure the impact. What kind of parameters do you use to measure impact? Can you share a few examples?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's hard data, obviously. There's like the number of people who participated in X, or the number of dollars that a foundation gave to its grantees, right? I think the biggest thing right now that is organizations are looking for is a more human way to tell the story of their impact. And so storytelling is like the key word right now of like, how do we tell the story of our grantees? How do we do it in a human and ethical way? How do we do it also in a, with like privacy issues in a lot of cases, but how do we tell the story of the way our work has changed the world, or the way that our work has changed individual people's lives in a way that's compelling and kind of shows what we're doing and tells what we're doing, not so much. The hard data is also important, but I think those two things hand in hand are really what organizations are looking for.
Can you share any examples of a specific client that you're allowed to share the case study of where they've done the biggest overhaul of their brand position and their mission, and maybe kind of made a big directional change? I don't want to I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
Yeah.
I didn't give you this question in advance.
Which is okay, yeah.
But I'm just curious because it's what's coming through, Lauren, is it's clear you understand the space. And like you said, when clients are choosing an agency partner, they want experts. And what better way, you not only understand how to develop relationships and kind of strengthen the revenue pipeline from existing clients, but you also have the expertise and the experience to be able to consult. Yeah. So you must have seen many clients in your time. And I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily be a positioning change. It could be maybe an example where you've made the biggest impact, or there was the biggest gain for that charity organization, not for profit.
Yeah. I'm like racking my brain here for a good example, and also one that I can share.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I can think of one example that I can't share the name, but I can make an anecdote, which is that it was a large family foundation that had a very large. Let me think about how I could say this that doesn't identify who they are.
So I really have put you on the spot, haven't I?
Yeah, I don't know if I can say that one. Let me think about it. Can we come back to the question?
Because
I'm sure there's an example, but I have to think about how, because I have a great example, but I can't.
Yeah.
And I think the crux of the example is their actual verbal identity. So if I say it, it's going to be very clear who it is. So let me think of an example. We'll come back to it.
Honestly, that is fair enough. That is fair enough.
It's tough. I'm under a lot of NDAs here.
I can imagine. Well, let's talk specifically about account management in a not-profit. I suppose the first question I've got, many account managers, I think, are drawn to this sector because they do have kind of an aligned values set, or they want to do good work in the world. They want to work for a company that's really, got mission and impact at the forefront of everything that they do. So obviously in an account management role, it's quite commercial. You're looking proactively for ways that you can develop the business for the agency you're working for, but also add more value to the clients. So being that strategic partner that you are. So how do you think, just talk to me about the people that you've met in this sector and whether there is in existence any kind of conflict?
Yeah, I think, honestly, I do not think that having a growth mindset and, working with purpose-driven agencies have to be at odds with one another. I think there's a little bit of a misconception, and maybe one that's founded like founded. It's in a little bit of truth, historically speaking. But I think there's a little bit of a misconception that like money in the social impact industry is a taboo subject, and that money is not moving everything. Because like every industry in the planet, money is moving everything, right? And the work can't be done, my work, but also the work of an organization can't be done without funding. And anyways, I think there's a little bit of a misconception that there's this whole taboo around money. And I think in a lot of ways not. Like people are quite aware of what it takes to do the work. And I think especially in the last couple of years, this industry has gone through its own kind of reckoning and has come out the other side with, I think, a lot more understanding that growth and money are really essential for sustainability and essential for, making that kind of change, as I said, for movement. The other thing I'll say is like having a growth mindset to me isn't just about financial growth. Like I think if you're only looking at the financial growth of your accounts, then you're maybe doing it wrong in any industry. Like there's so many other ways to gauge that. I do think I have a sneaking suspicion that the ROI on these long-term relationships in this industry might have a little bit of a longer timeline just because of funding cycles and fiscal years. But I definitely think there's a lot there. And I think there's a lot of growth, both financially and otherwise, that is possible in this industry. And I think that having a growth mindset and also having the incredible privilege of getting to do this work that like actually sometimes changes the world is totally possible. And I encourage anybody who's interested in it to do it because it's very rewarding work.
Well, I'd love you to expand on that. And particularly, I mean, again, maybe we could weave this in at the moment. We're talking about the account management role. You worked previously in an agency that didn't have a dedicated account management function, right? That's where we met each other. That's where I worked with you for a period of time. And that was the transformation. So can you bring that to life for the listeners? Because there's lots of reasons why people might be interested in this from an agency owner perspective, or maybe an account manager who's new to a role, or also thrown in the mix is thinking about a not-profit sector. So just paint a picture of what that journey looked like for you.
Yeah. I've got to do this now a couple of times. I think that agency, and since then working with some smaller organizations, agencies rather, and it is so exciting to watch because I feel like the process of moving from not having any accounts to having an accounts, an accounts function of some sort can really just, I've seen it completely change a business model. I've seen it completely flip the way that an organization even sees itself, an agency even sees itself. I think two of the biggest and kind of most exciting things I saw at that agency and at others has been like two big changes. One is with the internal team. I think when we build this level of trust with our clients, that they know that we have their best interests at heart, they know that they see us as imperative to, executing their mission, it unlocks so much ability for the internal creative team to be more creative, more imaginative, push the boundaries a little bit more, not be so beholden to a scope that's these specific things, but give the client a little bit bolder recommendations, show them things that maybe don't exist in the scope now, but that are other bold ways we could do this. I've seen it then also make the client feel a little more emboldened, especially once they have a bit of that education piece about why brand is so important. It just opens up more creativity and more imagination in a way that is so fun, and so it's fun to be a part of. But I've also obviously seen it change how the business runs, kind of top to bottom, like the whole business model, really. I think flipping from the kind of churn and burn of like we bring in to do these little projects and then we're out, we have to go after new business all the time, to more of a strategic long-term partnership way of working. Obviously there's the financial part of that, like being able to be more sustainable because business is coming back, but doing that work and trying to really get those longer term partnerships opened up a door that I don't think I realized before I started doing this work, which was that there are all these other soft, squishy things like our insights and our soft skills and the way we work and how the expertise about the space and the insights we see between one client and another who may be in completely different fields but are solving the same problem. All of our strategic thinking, all of that high level, being able to pull from the kind of micro change management to the macro change management, and being able to do that kind of back and forth flexibility. If you're a really good account manager, I think that's really important in this space. All of that are things we can sell. All of that are things we can monetize. All of that is a way that we actually package all of those deliverables that is not just changes what we're selling, but how we're selling it. And I think that shift was I wasn't expecting it to be so like, once it clicked, I was like, oh, we're playing a whole different ball game now. Like, this is a completely different way of thinking and the way of working. And when you see it be successful, it's really exciting, because I think, the goal of any account manager is to try to pull from that kind of, the deliverables based, project based, to this larger strategic thinking way of moving and creating long-term relationships. And when it's successful here, it's the same thing in this industry. Yeah.
You've explained it so well. Let's talk about the monetization, because we're not here necessarily talking about, for example, from a pricing perspective, going on not pricing, but a more project by project basis to a retainer-based model, are we? It's not quite so, but you described it as strategic thinking, applying to strategic thinking rather than more sort of reactive project-based. We've done that project, right? Where's the next one going to come from? And all of that angst around, gosh, we've got these great clients, we do a project, but then it's almost like, right, where's the next one? Yeah. So talk to us about that bridge and this different way of applying value, thinking strategically, sharing insights in what's working for other clients, demonstrating that you understand the macro and the micro. Like, how do you monetize that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's in a lot of ways, like I'm thinking about like in the new business process, the way I'm talking about the way that my team works. We have these deliverables and they are best in class. They're a high level of craft. That's table stakes. Other people can offer that, but no one else can offer what we have in terms of the way we think and the way our point of view on the whole thing. And I think the packaging of that is you can charge more for, like just from a baseline level of cost. And I think having a high level of expertise is definitely something clients are willing to pay for when they can. I think that there are other creative ways to package things that are not those strict deliverables that could be a little bit like a retainer in terms of a more strategic retainer. They're not a project. They're just access to our thinking. And sometimes clients are willing to pay for that because they want you around. And ideally, if you've done your job very well as an account manager in this space, you get invited to their strategic planning. You become part of their fiscal planning. They know they need the things you can give them. They just maybe don't even know what they are yet. Let's put that money aside for the next 5 years so that we can plug and play. It is kind of almost like retainer work, but is more, I think historically in an agency, a retainer also has a set of deliverables. And I think in this case, it's more about, access. Again, I think access is the word that keeps coming to my mind, of like being able to problem solve, being able to do some strategic workshops, being able to think through and problem solve bigger brand problems than like small executional tasks. Although those could also be included. Why not?
You said a couple of useful things there that I just want to reiterate is fiscal year planning and understanding from an account management perspective when the best time to involve yourself or to ask to be involved in that process for the client in order to add the most value. What else on a kind of practical basis was the difference between sort of more, project-based, finished, turning to this more longer term strategic thinking, becoming that go-to consultant that understands their market and their space? Like, on a practical level, for an account manager, what was that shift like?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting involved, like at the beginning of the project, getting a lot of that vital information, like when is their fiscal year, because sometimes it's different for every organization. Sometimes it's a calendar year, sometimes it's June. Understanding how far in advance they plan for that. Understanding where they are in their strategic plan. In an organization and institution space, a strategic plan is usually every 5 to 10 years. Knowing where are they in their current strategic plan, when is the next one being planned for, the planning for the plan. Who are they hiring to do that? Because oftentimes that's done by other consultants who are like strategic planning experts. In their current strategic plan, how far have they completed? What are the goals? What are the steps to meet those goals? A lot of times a branding exercise is a step of a goal of a strategic plan as opposed to part of the strategic plan itself, this sort of like a sub bullet. But just really, and that's like, vital information to know from the start of a project. I think doing a really thorough stakeholder engagement design is so important at the beginning of a project, because the stakeholders in every space, there's a lot of nuances, but I feel like in this space, there's even more, because there's just, there's so many stakeholders, and obviously it depends on the kind of organization, but sometimes their members or their staff are stakeholders. They want them to be involved. Sometimes the board needs to be involved, but not really. Sometimes the executive director needs a say, but not, and there's all these touch points in which you can, for me, I think when it comes to stakeholder engagement design in this space, I can add 20 extra workshops and meetings that are literally just there as like, we're making this group of stakeholders feel involved. We're not really giving them the chance to give feedback. We're kind of asking them leading questions. We're doing a workshop activity that feels like they're participating. There's a lot of different ways to engage, and setting that up from the beginning. You could add on there's a couple scopes of work right there, adding on presentations and workshops and ways to engage folks that isn't part of your regular, like, this deliverable has 3 rounds of revision and this deliverable has 3 rounds of revision, because that's actually being done by a different group completely, So like, there's that. I think the education piece, the stakeholder engagement piece can also be part of an education piece. I talked about educating my clients on why branding is so important and why it should be part of their strategic planning. It should be part of, a whole business pillar. But also an important thing that I have to do is coach my client to do that themselves, to elevate the brand themselves in every conversation they're in and every leadership meeting they're in or board meeting. How are they? And that's part of that coaching process. And those are extra touch points, right? I think having quarterly planning strategy sessions, obviously, that are outside of the project. Sometimes I'll use those to do more stakeholder engagement design, to say, okay, what stakeholder, we're X way through the project. What stakeholders are now feeling left out? How do we engage them again? Are there presentations we could give at your staff retreat that are going to like excite people and have them feel involved, and looking at those other just additional touch points that allow us to come in. And if we can't be there, then there's another opportunity to train the direct client to do it themselves. And how do we give them the talking points and the coaching to say, now you go and evangelize this brand or web or whatever it is we're doing, and give them the autonomy to go and do it themselves, which again kind of sells the work for us. So it's a win-win. So those are just some of them. Like there are many more I could probably go over, but those are some of the ones I think just add additional touch points, that some of which you may decide to include as a, working with us, you get access to these 4 touch points. And then beyond that, you can add those as additional scopes of work or additional, even if they don't have the funding, let's say, to do 6 more meetings, teach them how to do it so they can do it. Because if they are become a brand ambassador, that's just better for us, because that means they're kind of, the next time we go to sell something through, there's already a level of understanding there.
I had to change my pen because I was scribbling notes.
Hopefully that was a little bit of a ramble, but hopefully that was clear.
Let me just tell you how useful this is. And for reasons that you might not well, the listeners might not be original. I've just got to write it down because it's just so key. A couple of things that you just touched on. This added value piece, like the role of account managers. And obviously we're in the world of AI at the moment. Lots of people feeling very threatened. And what you've just highlighted is a role that I think the account manager can play within a client that's an enterprise level, like with multiple stakeholders. It's something that AI can't actually do. It is aligning. What you're talking about is classic change management practice.
Absolutely.
Aligning stakeholders, working out who they are, how they need to be involved, maybe having some kind of RACI model. They're responsible, they're accountable, they're consulted, they're informed. Not everybody's going to have a seat at the decision table, but they will play a part.
Yes.
So that's the first thing. That's really key. And this can be applied for anyone in the for-profit space. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And I think I've seen agencies make a RACI chart for a group of stakeholders, right? And my question to that is, yes, how are they being consulted though? How are they being informed? Can we inform them? Can we at least control how they're informed? Can we control how they're consulted? Can we be part of the process of how they make that decision? And so when I see a RACI chart, I'm like, yes, and like, what are the other steps where I get involved? Because I want to be part of that informing. I want to be part of that consulting.
So on a practical level, how would you get more involved? Let's suppose the client had a RACI chart and had mapped out the stakeholders already. How do you insert yourself to make sure that you are part of the dialogue?
Yeah, so I do something that's called stakeholder engagement design, which is sort of like designing the process. Think of like, as a project manager, you may sit down, you may make a timeline, right? And it's like, here's the steps in the process. And for me, I'm like, okay, and I do this with a client, oftentimes a couple of folks, or maybe folks who understand, offline, we can talk about the tensions that may be at play. Yeah. And say, like, where in the process is it best to I almost said insult. The best to inform. We're hoping not to insult.
Or insult.
The best to consult. Like, if we need to engage the board, do we want, based on what you know about your board, do we want them involved at round 2 revisions, or do we want them to see something final? Or even better, if you can build this into your timeline, is we want to show them something final, but we do want them to have a little bit of a say. And so that actually builds in another round of revision, technically. So I'm adding that to the scope. I'm adding in a presentation to the board, and I'm adding in a half round of revision where, like, we may not actually give them, we're not going to open the floodgates. Now let's say staff, we want them to see the final thing. We want them to feel engaged, but we can't open a can of worms. So maybe that's a survey. So we're going to send out a survey to our staff. But that does mean that internally the creative team has to pause while the survey goes out. So that's also kind of a round of revision there. And the survey needs to be designed. Someone's got to create it. Someone's got to collect the responses. Someone's got to analyze those responses. Maybe we can use a little bit of AI there, but we kind of need to know. And if something is a red flag, then we have to pause these are all like steps. And I think there are, in a really large organization, a really large agency, multiple places in which you can build this kind of thing in. And in the end, you're going to be better for it because you'll have gotten the feedback you needed from the right people who needed to be, consulted, engaged, informed, whatever, and built in the time and space for it, so that you aren't in the 11th hour with a board member who's decided they don't like purple or like whatever the thing may be, And those, at the larger the organization, the more of those you can build in. And I've had clients before where I make a map just like the project manager does. That's like, here's the next 2 years. Here's when the board meetings already are, because those are planned years in advance. Those are already on the calendar. So I know I need to line up a round 2 revision of this deliverable with this board meeting. And then after that, maybe there's, a senior leadership meeting. We want to have the final to show there. There's a staff retreat that's happening next year in spring. How can we engage the staff then? And I'm mapping it out across the whole thing. And I'm saying, okay, wait, but then fiscal year planning will be happening. So let's put a touch point there. Okay, also the strategic plan, maybe it's every 10 years, that ends next year. So let's think about how we can engage, involve that in this process. And then I come away with basically a map of 2 years of every touch point I want to add to the scope of work. And sometimes those touch points require a prep meeting. Board meetings often require, a pre-read. They might include, someone in person, maybe not. Like, there's all these other things. So I've now got a map of like a huge addition to the scope of work that didn't exist before because I just didn't think about how I would engage all of those people. So when I see a Bracy chart, in my head, what I see is that 2-year plan to be like, how am I engaging all of these people at a million different touch points in order to build the right input, but also like, increase the scope.
Love this. So in an agency where there is a separate project management team and a separate account management team, who do you see as the key person responsible for putting that together?
I think an accounts person. Because I think it requires a lot of, you've got to have a lot of trust from the client already. That this is like you've built quite a bit of relationship already, and some of that might have happened in the sales process. Maybe this is a client who you're actually already doing some work with, and now you're kind of bringing this up a little bit, later in the process. I also think it requires probably a little bit of, like I said, offline conversations to really talk, let a lot of venting on their part. Because they're dealing with the tensions all day and these politics internally all day, every day, and we don't envy them for that. But like, how do we let them get that out and then help them figure out? Okay, let's decrease this headache for you. Let's make this work in a way that, like I said, those are best done in conversations that are kind of like one-on-one with somebody who's closest to understanding the real way of this organization may work.
I think this has just been a golden tip for anyone listening in account management who have accounts where there are multiple stakeholders involved. I think, first of all, thank you for sharing that, because I think, it's really illustrative of how much value you are ultimately adding to the client relationship. So what we're not talking about here is coming up with additional tactical ideas or even an assessment of the brand or doing a brand audit, or it's not in the kind of the what, it's in the how.
Absolutely.
The other
it's
thing
a process. You're designing a process. And that's why I call it stakeholder engagement design. Like you are designing the process, and really, really the how.
Love it. And even for those listening on a micro level, even if the client has 3, 4, 5 different touch points, stakeholders, there's no reason why you can't do a mini version of what
I do it for everybody. I think it's important.
Tell us a bit about this train the trainer added value as well, because you're right, like how do we help our clients become more self-sufficient when it comes to doing what we can help them do? So can you bring that to life with an example?
Yeah, there's another step actually in I like to do in stakeholder engagement design that isn't just the Racy chart or a Darcy chart or whatever. It's also a little bit of a matrix that's more like, who's our biggest fan and who has the most influence. And so like over growth, right? Over sales. So you've maybe seen it. It may be available on accountmanagementskills.com. And I've taken that framework that I've learned from you and applied it to stakeholder engagement design, because
Amazing.
I also need to think about how that influence, and a high level of influence is important, but even sometimes those cheerleaders, those big fans of us, they're going to be great for, as I said, evangelizing the work, but they're also going to be great ambassadors later down the line. And it's good to have, when you're doing a really big rebrand project, especially one that includes verbal identity and there's a lot of big shifts, it is a great deal of change management, right? And you need somebody at every level of the organization who's going to say, no, I understand what's happening here. I was a part of the process. I see how this is going to make my work easier and better, so that they can help get others on board and help others understand. And that's not just the most influential, highest level person at the organization, right? You need those people everywhere. So on that chart, on that framework, the people with most influence are important, but so are the everybody who's a cheerleader or everybody who's already got an affinity towards your work, or even people who already have some brand knowledge and understand have been through a rebrand, why that's important. But in terms of the kind of coaching, and a lot of times in my work, I'm working directly with a communications team or a digital team, helping those folks, if they have not ever been through a rebrand before, they're not as brand experts, doing that education piece every step of the way and doing that coaching every step of the way, so that they, like I said, they go to their leadership team meetings, they go to their board meetings, and they're talking the way we talk. And now we've got an ambassador who's selling the work for us, and sometimes that can look like, as I said a moment ago, sometimes maybe the client doesn't have the money to add on a bunch of presentations for my agency to come in and give the presentation. But that to me says, okay, let us make the presentation for you. Let us make some talking notes for you. And let me just get on a 30-minute call and we can talk through how you could explain this work on our behalf. I'm not going to be in the room, but that's an opportunity for me to give them a free 30 minutes of my time that has a high ROI if they're selling our work well, and just generally coaching and giving them my time and giving them my expertise is why not? I think that's a good use of 30 minutes.
Well, it's a good use of your 30 minutes. It's high value. And also, ultimately, what we're trying to do is get this kind of influencing internal stakeholders so that there's no roadblocks to continuing our work.
Yeah.
So there's so many reasons why that's going to work. I was actually thinking maybe in the future they could have an AI talking head of Lauren Jones that pops up at the board meeting.
Yes, so I'll just have to feed all of my knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, Lauren, this is just so useful. Thank you so much. I'm just conscious of time, and I want to kind of any advice for anyone listening that wants to work in the not for profit area. Where would you find inspiration, advice, more educational pieces, anything that you would suggest that they get themselves up to speed or more current with what's happening? Because you've talked a lot about trends, about sharing best practices, looking at what's working for other organizations. Where do people go to upskill themselves?
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of great organizations that are membership-based organizations that are for folks who work in the nonprofit space, and I think those are good places to look for what are the newsletters that people who work in the nonprofit space are getting? What kind of news articles are they reading? Where are they going for their resources? And then use that to kind of understand better what's happening in the space. Some of those that are really great are there's one called Nonprofit New York, but it's the New York chapter of a larger national organization. And they have chapters all over the U.S. and maybe even outside of the U.S. now that I think of it. So they're a good resource. The same for philanthropy. There's a philanthropy group that they have a philanthropy in New York, but they have them all over the country. Communications Network is a ComNet. It's a membership-based organization for communications individuals at all different kinds of nonprofits and philanthropies, institutions across all of the U.S., and they've just opened a chapter, or they're opening a chapter, I think, in London. Oh, wow. I actually went to one of their events when I was there and saw you. And so that's exciting. There's a lot of people I think are getting excited about having that network there. They do a great conference every year. Again, these are not for consultants. They're for people who work in the industry, but I think that's the best way to get to know what folks in the space are dealing with on their day-to-day in order to then try to help problem solve some of those things. Those are great organizations, and they have great newsletters. Nonprofit Quarterly is another news organization that puts out a lot of articles. There's a few others like that I can also maybe send you that.
We'll include any links that you send. Okay. That's brilliant. And finally, I probably should have said this earlier, but any key trends you can see happening in the future? What are you seeing personally for the healthy survival of any organization that relies on donations and charities and fundraising and things like that?
And is this, sorry, to clarifying question, is it, do you mean of agencies or do you mean of actual, like the actual nonprofits and philanthropies
I
or
think
both?
start with the non-profits themselves, because
Okay.
ultimately, if we don't understand what challenges and future trends they're experiencing, we can't align ourselves. So, what would you say were impacting them?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest trends, I mean, obviously 2025 has been a tough year for the space at large, particularly here in the US. I think funding kind of froze at the beginning of the year, and I think that impacted I mean, money froze across the board in every industry, but I feel like this one was particularly hit hard. I do. I am seeing that unfreeze a little bit now. This summer, I think things are picking a little bit back up. I mean, work has to get done, and I think most organizations right now, and philanthropies too, are saying we're going to keep doing the work as long as we can. We're just diversifying our funding. We're finding new ways to reach our audiences, finding new ways to tell our story, and finding new ways to, meet our missions. And I think that plus I think, as I said earlier in this, there has been, particularly in the US, I think this erosion of trust of large institutions, of large philanthropies, even of just nonprofit organizations. And I think finding ways to rebuild that trust, and I think that is really done in a lot of ways through storytelling and showing that impact through real human stories of actual people whose lives have been made better by these organizations and by funders who are moving money through organizations. And so I think having those things in mind for agencies working with these, I think one is being very flexible, very maybe nimble, finding ways of working that are not the traditional, this is you have to sign this contract in this order and but being able to be a little more creative and problem solving in the way that you work with your clients. I think obviously always prioritizing relationships and the value that you bring to those relationships, because as things are starting to unfreeze and RFPs are coming back into the world, having those relationships that you've maintained even when things were like keeping those relationships and continuing that value and keeping in touch with those folks is going to come back to be repeat clients. I think having, as an agency, I also think in addition to the flexible, nimble, I think having a point of view on the future of technology, of AI, of how you want to do your work and how your work may change and how you plan to approach that before your clients come asking. It's a good thing to have maybe thought through because they will come asking, and you want to have thought about that, especially if you work in the digital space, really thinking through what that world may look like and how we plan to approach that. And then lastly, I'd say I already said relationships, I guess, is such a big thing, but I think having the social impact agency space has become much larger over the last 5 years, 10 years, but 5 years specifically. I think post 2020, there's a lot more independent consultants. There's a lot more small agencies providing work to this industry. And I think my biggest recommendation to them would be to build some kind of account function, even if they're not ready for a full-time hire or a whole team or what, there are small ways. There are some tenets of account management. There's some best practices. You could probably find them on accountmanagementskills.com. There's lots of free resources there. I go there frequently, but there's a lot of kind of small changes, some low-hanging fruit, so to speak, of ways that you can implement things that will have a lot of value and a lot of ROI until, if you're not ready for a full-time hire yet.
Lauren, this has been absolutely superb. Thank you so much for joining us, and also for sharing so much detailed insight and tips, because that's what I love about these episodes, that people can come away with actionable, things to do, things to implement straight away. So thank you to you for joining me. Yeah. If anyone wants to talk to you, who would you ideally want to talk to, and what's the best way of reaching you?
Yeah. I love my job, and I love talking about the thing. I have the best job in the world. I love talking to people about account management. I love talking to people about account management in this space. I love talking to people who work at nonprofits or work with them. So like anybody in that world. I also, I love to also talk to folks who are interested in joining the social impact space and maybe looking at doing a career shift. I'm happy to talk to people about what that looks like. I think it's an industry that can definitely make a shift into. It's not like a impossible move. So yeah, I'm happy to people reach out to me. You can give them my email address and I'd be happy to chat.
That's very sweet of you. Thank you so much. Very generous.
Yes. And
Lauren,
LinkedIn.
And LinkedIn.
Yes.
We'll put your LinkedIn profile there. Lauren, thank you again. This has been brilliant.
You're so welcome.